we're live. It is Friday, July 3rd, 2020, which is July 4th as celebrated, so that we get a day off. 5:00 p.m., 5:01 now. YouTube is working appropriately, so we are on time. I want to tell you a story. I was a young cub at the Washington Post. I had just started. And I got to tell you, I was 27 years old. I was 15 years younger than the next youngest person who wrote editorials for the Washington Post, and probably 30 years younger than the youngest person after that. When I got to the Washington Post editorial page, there was a lot of reminiscing about the Johnson administration. And the oldest person on the Washington Post editorial page was Herb Block, who was just about to turn 90. And so, you could actually do some reminiscing about much earlier administrations than the Johnson administration. And I felt really freaking young. And I was there for about 2 weeks. And I was down in the Washington Post cafeteria. And I found myself randomly sitting next to this person whom I had never seen before, who had just started. She had started like 2 days earlier. And she was within spitting distance of my own age, which made her a bit unusual in that period of the Washington Post. And she informed me that she was the new assistant polling director of the Washington Post. And her name was Claudia Deane, and she had a shock of strikingly red hair. And she was super freaking funny. And
pressure's on now.
Yeah. And we became like fast friends, and we were, I think she left the Post shortly before I did, after she had become polling director there for a while. And we were both there for just about 10 years. And it was this, when I think of like my Washington Post, like sibling, it is Claudia Deane. And I learned so much about polling from Claudia, who also measured my kids' height along in the polling department. There may still be, because they don't, they moved and they demolished the building, but if they hadn't demolished that building, somewhere there would still be the measurements of my kids' height, particularly my older kid, in Claudia Deane's office. And Claudia has gone on to, run the Pew Research Center polling department. And she is super great fun. But before we get to polling and all the things that, we're here to talk to Claudia about, it's really important to talk about our most important contribution together at the Washington Post, which was the collection of pet peeves. And this was, I don't know whether it was Claudia who came up with it or it was me, but Claudia and I noticed about each other that we both had eccentric dislikes of things.
Mostly you.
No, I think
mine are pretty normal. I mean,
yeah,
I think you're just really irritable. You're easily irritated.
So we will let viewers decide which ones are more eccentric. But what we decided to do was catalog different people's pet peeves. And we came up with Claudia is a political scientist by background, so we came up with a appropriately rigorous definition of a pet peeve. And it all started because I hated the wind chill factor and the heat index, and Claudia hated the phrase "yay you," cloves, and what were your other big ones? Your friend
don't name names.
imitation of
there was
the
a
chicken.
pecking chicken thing that was.
Yeah, it was a pecking chicken.
Yeah.
I love this. Can I get in on this?
Oh,
yes, you can get
no,
in
wait,
on
he hasn't. This is the thing.
So here's the thing.
Okay. All right, you're leading with your not very irritating ones. I think okay, so to be a pet peeve, basically, it has to be something that, like, when you tell 95 out of 100 people should say, that's stupid, why does that bother you? Okay, it has to be massively just, do you know what I mean? It can't be something that irritates everybody.
So what you're saying is 2 standard of deviations, Claudia.
It has to not pass the objectively annoying test to be a pet peeve. It has to.
How do you feel about
objectively annoying? It can't just be. So I'm concerned for Ben that what he thinks of as his marquee pet peeve, which is the wind chill index, is now become like more of a societal annoyance, and it may not really be a pet peeve anymore. It may just be something that is annoying.
Wait a minute, do people, you considered that relentlessly
has to be pet to you?
Let me
give you another example. Ben thinks electric knives are annoying.
Electric
completely
knives are
correct. What? Who? What?
All right. Well,
also, what the fuck is an electric?
We need to get 100 people. I mean, I just think this is why you two have found each other. There is nothing objectively annoying about an electric knife. That's just
no. Electric knives are for people who can't go like this.
Yes. You know what else is annoying?
And it people doesn't make them annoying.
Okay.
People has an automated drill. You don't really want her to be.
People standing on escalators, literally, they are stairs. Walk up them, them. They're stair assists.
I feel that's too widespread to be an actual pet peeve. I feel like a pet peeve has to be extremely quirky. It's like,
let's talk about one that's absolutely quirky, Claudia. Yay, you.
I don't know. There's something like weird positivity. I can't tell you why that bothers me.
What is that from?
I don't know, but people, I attract it. People say it to me. And when they do, I immediately pass it on to Ben. No one's ever said that to you?
Like, not really. My pet peeve is maybe no one ever's happy for me. I lead a very sad life. I have this, I hate my mother, and it might be because my mother says it, things happen for a reason. And I say to my mother, you can say that about fucking everything, Mom. Like, it is completely useless. It doesn't make me feel any better.
Oh yeah,
I like that. Hating things happen for a reason. Okay, so before we go on to polling to the audience, the Q&A is open. Leave your pet peeves, the things you irrationally hate, and we will evaluate them whether they go on the pet peeve list, which Claudia and I have kept mentally for probably 15 years now.
We are crotchety. We were apparently very crotchety when we were young.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
All right.
Polling.
I was going to say, I have a good question that segues between pet peeves and polling, which is p-values. How do you feel about p-values, Claudia?
Well,
p-values?
They're of limited value.
Agree.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
Introduce us to the Pew Research Center. Everybody has this sense when there is in a news story, a Pew poll says that that's like a kind of gold standard thing. But like, what is Pew and what do you guys do and what do you not do? So I think part of what's interesting about Pew is like the stuff that you don't do.
Yeah, so we are a research center. We're funded primarily by our parent organization, which is the Pew Charitable Trust, which is a philanthropy. We are located in DC. There's about 170 of us. We are primarily some combination of journalists, former journalists, and academic dropouts. We have a lot of sociologists, political scientists. Well, many of them finished before dropping out. I just mean they didn't stay in the academy. And we're trying to do nonpartisan social science research in the public interest. We study things like politics, certainly Americans and global views on different aspects of politics, but we also study attitudes towards religion, which is kind of an interesting thing I hope we can talk a little bit about today, because our federal government doesn't really measure religious statistics, so we are often the not the newspaper of record, whatever we are, the think tank of record on those stats, and also migration, attitudes towards science, a bunch of different things like that. But we don't take partisan money, we don't take positions, we don't even have opinions, which I had to warn Ben about before coming on, because it can make for a rather dull hour-long podcast. But I brought a lot of data, which I am threatening to show you.
No, you're definitely going to show us. But first of all, let's talk about the we don't give opinions thing. What like you do some political polling.
Yes.
So what are the lines between what you do? In fact, you guys released a major election poll recently. What is the line between the things that you do in the electoral space and the things you don't do?
Well, the big pivot for us was a couple of years ago, and I know given Ben's interest, we may end up talking about this sort of polling as an industry or a business, what role we're trying to fill. I'm a big booster. I think it's a really useful thing to have if done right, but I would admit the industry is in a time of transition, but part of that transition has been about the proliferation of polls. And so for us, one of the things that we stepped away from is sort of a intense focus or tracking on the horse race. And for those who aren't familiar, that just means measuring which candidate is ahead and behind. And you can see in the time that I've been in polling, it's changed from where you might have a handful of institutions measuring that to on any given day, you could have 100 institutions weighing in on that. So for us, we decided that's not so useful. So we really don't get in there that much about how has the scandal of the day played, who's up, who's down today, why are they up and down, what do they need to do to win? That's not really our thing. We're trying to look at the biggest possible picture, like our president always says, the tide's not the waves. So, the change in partisan polarization over time, like those big drift things. So I don't know if that helps, but.
All right. John Bordeaux proposes as a pet peeve, pine nuts do not belong in food. I recuse myself from this as somebody who's allergic to nuts. What do you guys think?
Yes, pet peeve.
Really? They're completely inoffensive. And
that's why it's a pet peeve.
Well,
that's why
it's a pet peeve.
Oh, okay. Yes. Fair. Yes.
It's something that a normal person
I see what we're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like,
okay,
this was
John,
a good...
that's the tricky
it's
move.
on the list.
Yes.
Pine nuts don't belong in food. I agree with it, but only because I have a violent allergy to pine nuts. So I don't share your general irritation at pine nuts. I just don't want to be killed.
Congratulations, John. First official.
John, you've made the list. So, Claudia, what substantive issues should we start with on polling? Let's start with COVID-19.
Yes, please.
Do you have data to share with us on COVID-19?
I would like to. Oh, if you will, can you undisable?
I will enable you to share your screen. Try it now.
I feel so trusted.
Empowered is the word.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Tell me when to stop because I do get enthused.
Oh no.
I'm here for it. Random question, Claudia.
Content we're here for.
Have you done any work with Dan Kahan by any chance?
Mm-mm.
No. Okay.
I think this is a fascinating slide, and this is from pretty early on, and I think I keep coming back to this. We're updating it shortly, but I guess the thing that has surprised me most about the pandemic, I don't know why it surprised me, is the extent to which the views of a disease have been seen through such a partisan lens. There's some interesting reality behind the sort of geographic spread of the pandemic that's oddly political, but obviously the disease in. But look at this slide. Okay, so this is the share of people who are saying the coronavirus outbreak is a major threat to. And on the right, you're seeing the total share threat, who say it's a threat, and then you're seeing the partisan breaks. And so what you can see is we're all united and have been kind of from the beginning in saying the outbreak is a threat to the economy, but we are so divided in terms of whether we see the outbreak as a threat to the health of the US population. I mean, look at that difference. And everything that follows, every sort of anything you could ask people about what they're doing in reaction, how they're feeling about their governors, how they feel about restrictions, kind of flows from this one basic fact, which is that most Democrats do think the coronavirus is a threat to our country's health in general, and most Republicans don't.
And how much of that, Claudia, do you attribute to partisanship in the sense that Republicans perceive taking the virus, or more likely to perceive taking the virus seriously as a threat to President Trump, Republican incumbents, and the governance of Republicans in office? And how much of it do you see as mostly so far, although this is changing now, the virus has affected Democratic states and disproportionately affected groups that are Democratic constituencies, particularly disproportionately affected African Americans. And so, Republican strongholds are likely to be less affected by it so far, and therefore to feel it less immediately.
Okay, well, I'm not sure how I feel about your question wording, but
why?
No, in terms of like, is it one or the other? Like, I don't think people think about it so strategically. I do think there is some geographic reality. When we looked early on at where heavy case counts were, and this analysis did get us into a little bit of trouble on social media because it seemed very callous, but we were pointing out that cases were disproportionately high in Democratic congressional districts, which we obviously weren't saying that, there was any reason for that. That's just because Democratic districts tend to be urban and people live closer together, and maybe you don't have as good health insurance coverage in some of the districts. So I think we'll be able to unravel a little bit more of that sadly, as the natural experiment of the virus now moving to some more Republican controlled states happens.
Yeah.
I think what you have to go back to is the sort of underlying big picture public opinion currents of our lifetimes that play into this. One is decreasing trust in government and everything sort of government says, particularly at the federal level. Americans in general tend to like their local and state governments, but huge partisan splits in whether you believe that the federal government has anything worth listening to or is trying to help the American people, right? So you have starting with a giant Republican distrust of that. Where is this information coming from the federal government? The second thing is the giant fracturing of the media to the point where it's almost impossible. Like, it's a major challenge for us as pollsters to try and measure where people are getting their information. But let me show you this one slide about trust in the media. This is all what people are willing to do, and I can go back and show you that. Oh, it was the last one. This is trust in the media right now. Percent of adults who think the news media's coverage of COVID outbreak is getting me the information I need. Democrats 73, Republicans 44. Accurate. 66-31. Working for the benefit of the public, helping the country. So, I mean, if you have information on this pandemic coming from the media, coming from the federal government, and yet you've been in an era where one party has decided they don't trust either of those sources, then you have a problem. And I think that's kind of what you see.
So I want to know, okay, so there's a couple of things. I had a question about the methodology in the last slide, but now that we're on this one, two questions.
Yeah.
One, which relates to the methodology of all of this. How are you measuring partisanship? Is it self-reporting entirely? Is it just kind of like, do you identify as, or are you doing some other type of kind of trying to suss out political partisanship?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I should say just something about our methodology. So as you guys know, polling is in a lot of turmoil right now, trying to figure out how to go from the phones to doing online polling in a way that's still very broadly representative. We have moved online. We do a national random sample, but we recruit because I don't know. Should I assume your audience is like super knowledgeable about this? I don't want to bore anybody.
They're pretty sophisticated, I would say.
So we do like address-based sampling to get our panel, because that's the only sort of list where you can actually get a random sample of the public, because there's no like list of people's email addresses or things. And then we built a panel from that for people who aren't online, because that's still some share of the American population. We are putting them online. We are giving them tablets. That is a really great solution, except for the problematic parts of it, which is we sort of change them. But in any case, we're working pretty hard to get a probability-based sample of the public, and we have about 10,000 people impaneled, and that's who we survey. To your specific question, when I'm looking at partisanship here, I am looking at self-reported partisanship. And you can say this is a pet peeve or not. This is where I'll go off script for necessarily the Pew Research Center. I myself do not necessarily believe in political independence. And so I'm also taking people who say they're independents, but when asked if they lean one way or the other, I am putting them in the bucket with whoever they lean toward, which leaves very few people left in the middle. So it is self-identified.
And why do you not believe in political independence?
Because empirical data shows that people who say they're independent are trying to signal something to you. But if you ask them which direction they lean, their positions on the issues and their voting records, as both in terms of their self-reported data and when you match people up to voter files, show that they act like partisans. Not partisans in the nasty P sense, they act like, if you're an independent lean Democrat and I stripped that out of the file and just showed your views and your actions and your data, almost indistinguishable.
Misha. Sorry. That's really interesting, because I did a lot of like motivated reasoning research in grad school. And I have a lot of skepticism for polls, mostly because of the self-reporting nature of everything. If everything was up to me, it would be like eye movement research and stuff like, but I mean, I also
I'd love to talk about that more. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, I think that polls can be super helpful for things like this. And if you want to know how people are going to tell or perform certain types of politics, this is perfectly fine as a measure of certain things. So I think that but what I was going to ask specifically about the trusting media on COVID is, how different is that from trusting media writ large?
It's the same.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I felt like it was probably the same as I was seeing before the pandemic.
Yeah, I have a good slide. I want to show you. You have to stay tuned while I scroll. Make small talk while I scroll from my slide.
And what are your ends on these normally?
Well, right now they're really big. Oh, I love these questions. They're like 10. We have 10,000 people on the panel.
Wow, that's great.
I know. You have to actually be careful. I used to really be able to tell people, you need to look for a certain sample size and make sure it's a big sample. But now when you do these online samples, they can get so tremendously large. But if they're not based on some sort of like reliable and considered methodology, that doesn't necessarily mean something. You can get, all kinds of like false positives.
Well, like MTurk is a great example of like having a huge N. Yes, having a huge N and having it all be of the same type of person, all like working for 19 cents an hour.
It's not a good place to get a sample of the public.
Sorry, Ben, are you familiar with MTurk? I'm sure you are, but
I'm not, unless
you might work on it part-time.
Oh, you mean Mechanical Turk?
Yeah.
That's what the cool kids call it.
I never heard it called MTurk, but yes.
I rarely hear it called Mechanical Turk. I think that it's an interesting question to you, Claudia, to dovetail on Ben's question and what you brought up earlier about the loss of phone polling, is like this movement into online polling and the biases that inherently creates in the polling populations that you can reach.
Well, the worst one is the one we already talked about. It's just the people who aren't normally online. So older folks. I mean, this is a problem that may die out, right? I mean, we eventually all will be online, I think. But for now, Yeah, it's a problem, but the online polling has other advantages per your thought about people. What I took you to be referring to is the fact that people don't always tell you the truth, or they don't know what the actual answer is to the question. They don't even know how they feel, so they can't accurately represent, or you're asking them to forecast something. I think doing online polls is better than a phone poll, right? We show all kinds of effects when we compare phone polls to online polls that make us think online polls are better in a way, right? Because we are creatures that do not like to admit our flaws to other people other than perhaps our pet peeves. So even if you have a stranger as an interviewer on the line, if you're asking about any sensitive behavior, there's a peer pressure there that you don't have when you're doing an online poll. So that
Absolutely
manifests itself in some very ugly, unattractive ways. Like you get higher unfavorable rates for like female politicians when you're doing it online, because people don't feel embarrassed to be like, no, I don't like Michelle Obama or whatever.
Because no one's watching. I mean, this is like classic self-reporting, like how many people in the room, what is the racial makeup or the gender makeup of the person asking like the polling questions. Like, can you tell that they're Black? Like as they ask you a question about Barack Obama, like there's just, you're going to get a totally different.
So help me out with this, Claudia. Because on the one hand, 10 years ago, I totally got the idea that large numbers of people, only X percent of people were online. So if you do polls online, you're skewing your demographic younger.
Yeah.
And you're probably making it, less minority. But today, the universe of people who are carrying around cell phones is a whole heck of a lot closer to the general, or smartphones specifically, is a whole heck of a lot closer to the general population than it was only very recently. And so who are you missing when you do polls online? It seems to me to have, you can tell by looking at the 538 pollster rankings that the online polls are still underperforming in terms of, I don't know how valid you think those pollster rankings are, but they do seem to favor telephones. They do seem to disfavor all online stuff. And so I'm trying to figure out like what is it that you miss by being all online?
Okay, well, first of all, maybe should I get rid of this slide? Is it irritating? Online polls are not all the same. You have to think about what's happened in polling a little bit like what's happened in journalism, which is there used to be barriers to entry, right? You needed a building, reporters, wire service, whatever, and now you could just be at home and you could start your own newspaper. The same thing is really true of polling. The barriers to entry have gotten much lower because when you were doing phone polls, you needed actual people calling. You needed like a calling center, interviewers, a way to record them. Now with online polls, you can do a pop-up thing. You can get responses for very little money. So, but it doesn't mean that the way you do that still matters. We do not have it all sussed out. There's a million new companies. I can't even figure out, like, you could give me names and I wouldn't know that much about them. I can't really keep track of everybody. But it still takes some sort of art and craft to do a good poll online. If you're doing like a river sample where you're just getting anybody who comes through one commercial website, it's not going to be a good poll. I mean, we know those surveys really undersample. Well, they're sort of the easy online surveys. They get way more young people, way more educated people, more liberals. They're disproportionately white. I mean, you still have to kind of put in some effort to do a good survey. So the problem is it's hard to tell them apart. It used to be that I could very easily go explain to somebody, hey, look for these things in a poll. That'll tell you it's high quality. That's way harder now. So
I completely agree, Claudia. I think that there's like, no. I think that we have not figured out the art of polling. as like now that polling has become more democratic, frankly, like through the internet. And I think that like we haven't translated it, and everything you're saying about the samples is correct. And I also think that like I just took this, I was smiling as you were talking about this because I just took a Vanderbilt poll that I was like I don't know how they got my name, but I participated and I'm interested in it because it's going to be about it's about decision making. And it was a cognitive science poll, and I filled it all out, and it took 10 minutes. And the last question, it was like 3 large paragraphs, and 3 sentences into the first paragraph, it was like, this entire prompt is false. And the only thing that you should answer is no.
Oh,
To prove that you were actually reading the prompts and that you weren't like a garbage person, just like putting putting like randomized answers into the thing. And I thought it was quite clever, and I liked it a lot. And I don't know, I love little like kind of experiment design is really hard. And I think that like things like that are great. So
we did I'll try and remember to send you after. We did a big survey looking for bogus respondents. And we were just curious how easy it is to basically hack polls and how much junk is actually happening in some of those online samples. And the thing we found was, both disheartening and heartening, in that it didn't seem like there was malicious junk happening in the online samples. It's just good old-fashioned junk, like people who need money. So to the extent that these polls are paying you a little bit, for taking them, if you get in some of these panels, there were ways that people were coming in from outside the United States, purporting to be from the US by like moving their IP address or whatever, just to try and participate in the survey, just to get the extra $5 or whatever. So yeah, you have to put in traps, and people put in like speeding traps and all different things like that. Yeah.
All right, we've got 3 polling methodology questions. So I'm going to have Luca, Michael, and Zach ask their questions in sequence, and then you can answer them in sequence. Luca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I have a question related to the fact that you have a panel. We know that in many cases, political and social opinions are rather sticky. They don't change much over time. Can you measure change given the particular data set that you have?
Yep.
You mean because it's a panel as opposed to a sample?
Così, grazie Luca Rigotti.
Prego.
Molto italiano. So we have a panel. He's absolutely correct. So we are asking the same people over time. This has its advantages. In the modern climate, it's difficult. It would be difficult to keep recruiting a very solid sample over and over. It's cost prohibitive. Our panel costs millions of dollars to build, but the danger of I'm a pessimist, so I'll start with the danger. The positive of the panel is you can look at over time change, not just as a society and say, for example, we're getting more likely to favor XYZ. You can look at individual people and see if they're consistent over time. So yes, Luca, we have been trying to do that. For example, in our most recent political report, if you go to pewresearchcenter.org, we did it's called a longitudinal analysis. When you look at the same people over time, we looked at people to see how many people still approved of Trump in March and now. And to the extent that people had moved from approve to disapprove, who were they? And when we did that, we found that the people who were more likely to move away from him were younger, less educated, and more likely to be in heavily COVID impacted states. So it's the kind of thing you can do. I have to say, it's a hard reflex for us. And when we go try and report that kind of data out to reporters, they still don't want to think about it as in-person change. They want to just think of it as like societal level change. So I don't know. We're trying to strengthen that muscle.
Michael, you're up.
So due to COVID, have response rates increased due to more people being stuck at home? Is it easier to poll now than say a year ago?
That's a great question. That's all the buzz at the extremely glamorous pollster convention that we attended virtually last month. We don't have good data on it. We're super empiricists, so we're not going to say that, but we don't have enough good data. But yes, I feel that is what you're going to find. I see early data that suggests that It's partially probably, like you said, because we're stuck at home, and it's also because we're all obsessed with this topic. I mean, a lot of times you're calling and asking somebody a survey about, climate change when they just couldn't care less about it. But this topic, we're all pretty interested. So we'll have to see. A bird just hit my glass. Sorry, bird. Go ahead.
This topic being the election, or this topic being COVID?
The pandemic, the protests. Yeah. No, the election. No, the election is not always something people want to talk about, I think. In fact, when we recruited our panel the first time, we recruited it off a political survey, and we're not going to do that again because we feel like it attracts a certain kind of person and repels another kind of person, and we don't want to do that. So now when we do our recruiting surveys, we try and make them pretty anodyne.
That's interesting.
Zach Bliss, the floor is yours.
Cool. So I love the impaneled population.
Oh, we can't hear you. You sound a little bit far away.
Oh.
There you go. That's much better.
Now. Yep. So I'm a big fan of the impaneled population thing. And do you think they're going to
Whoa. Having trouble hearing you.
Can he type in his question?
Yeah,
he did. Zach, I'm sorry. I think we're going to have to read your question.
Yeah, read it.
Big fan of impaneled populations. It seems like they are going to become more useful the more it becomes easier to do regular polling. In what seems like a lot of important ways, elections are just polls. We have decided to legally grant institutional decision-making authority. As polling matures, should we consider using them as tools for other policy institutional decisions? Great question, Zach. I two-finger that question. I think it's a good one.
Is Zach an employed political scientist? That sounds
possibly. He is a regular attendee of the show. Hi, Zach.
Yeah, really. Zach could be a new guest. That reminded me, I never saw the downside of the panels. The downside that I worry about with the panels that we're constantly studying is whether you change people by impaneling them. Like if I just hammer you every time asking you things about knowledge questions or election security, does that make you start paying attention to the news so that you could answer the questions in a way that you would perceive as better? So that is a problem with the impaneled surveys.
And is there any evidence of that, or is that just a concern?
There's some evidence of it. We haven't found it in ours yet, but we haven't had people impaneled all that long. And
how long have people been impaneled right now?
Some people maybe 3 or 4 years. Our people tend to really stick around.
And do you cycle them in and out to control
for that? Yes, and we're constantly trying to recruit to get the hard to get people. So the hard to get people, or what surveys have a lot of trouble with in particular, are people who don't use English as their first language. And so one interesting small polling tidbit is, when our major immigrant populations were Latinos, that was relatively easy to solve by translating your survey into Spanish. Now that our largest immigrant groups on a year-to-year basis are Asian Americans, you have a lot more languages to deal with. And so very few pollsters survey in Asian languages outside of maybe California state polls. I think the state pollsters in California do, but I mean, it's just very cost prohibitive. On Zach's question, though, I don't know what you guys think.
It's really hard to get non-English speaking, non-college educated white people.
Who are
that was
those?
A joke.
Oh, it's like the
Do they
polls.
exist?
But I don't know. You guys could answer Zach's question as well as I could. Do you think polls should be used instead of an election? I don't know. If we vote by mail, is it almost like a mail-in poll? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, the difference is it's not sampled.
No, it's a census. It's intended to be a census, not a poll.
Legitimacy
a survey is like a subsample, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if you want the legitimacy of the consent of the governed, you can't use a sample.
Yes.
You have to use. You actually have to use the plebiscitary nature of the election. Now,
whoa, that vocab word just blew me away.
I kind of made it up. I'm not sure it's
Can somebody
real
check
word.
if that's a word before I use it in conversation? And
I have a universal encyclopedia at my fingertips.
Okay,
so
good.
I
don't know, but guys, that is a really good movie plot. That's like a political drama where we've decided in the future to use a sample, and then like all the scheming and how you can corrupt that so that only certain people get in the sample. That's like
I think that's Runaway Jury.
Pollster dream movie. Pollsters rule America.
All right, so we have
I sell slots in the sample.
We have an unbelievable number of pet peeves here.
Oh,
I think we should save them for the end and go through them one by one.
Sorry, people, you got to see more data.
I have a question that dovetails just really quickly.
Though before the end, Kate, after your question, can I show you guys? I want to show you the party data over time.
No, go ahead, pull it up. I'll just ask my question. It dovetails on Zach's question, which is just kind of like what strikes me as what's problematic about self-reporting, polling, or any type of self-reporting kind of survey or experiment is that it doesn't match the situation that it's projected onto. So like, if people are getting asked to self-report in one environment, it is not like the same environment that they would then go and like, it's a projection to another person, as in phone reporting, or it's or something like that, versus how they would actually vote in a voting booth when they're completely on their own, right? And there's no social pressures and nothing else is constraining them.
Can be. I mean, it's certainly correlated with their eventual behavior. It's just very imperfect.
Right. But I was going to say that self-reporting actually, like, as you were kind of saying online, kind of cures us of that defect, particularly in the kind of scenarios that Zach was kind of talking about, was like kind of you're imagining if like being online in your personal computer by yourself is like very much like kind of being by yourself in a voting booth. No one's going to know what you say in this poll. It's anonymized and whatever. And so I wonder if that's actually really solves the self-reporting problem as far as political kind of stuff goes.
I think the worst problem is people don't always really know what they're going to do. And you can't really cure that when you're asking people so many months ahead, especially, I mean, it's one thing to ask about Trump or Biden, everybody knows, but you know, people are doing polls about the Senate or the House. Like, people haven't thought about it enough. I can be very critical of polling, but also people ask things of it that are just ridiculous. I mean, it's just not gonna be able to do that. I mean, do you know humans? This is not physical science, it's social science. You're dealing with this terrible, messy problem of, you know, humanity. But I wanted to show you this. I wanted to show you that because we're about to update this. This is for 17, but we updated it in 19. We're about to release it. But the thing that's changed so much over recent years, but I'll have to take you through. Can you guys see this?
No.
No.
You got to share your screen.
I'm glad you told me that, because otherwise I would have just started talking about it. Stay tuned. Please share. I'm clicking.
There it is.
It's tired. It's had a hard week. It's Friday night. Can't believe you're still making me work. Actually, this is fun, so it shouldn't count. So this is our party balance over time. Like I said, we're about to give you new ones, but sorry, it's coming out shortly. And it can just show you sort of here, I humor the people who believe in independence and show you Rep Dem independent over time. This is from 94 on the left. And then you can see on the right, I've pushed the independents to leaners. And it looks like party identification has been very stable over time. But actually, what's happened underneath is there's this sort of massive shift that the Democratic Party, you know, it's becoming more racially diverse, less religious, and better educated at a faster rate than the country as a whole, while aging at a slower rate, and the Republicans are doing the opposite. So this is some of this. And so the parties are, I mean, I just think this explains a lot of our election, like how different the two parties are becoming. So this is showing you the share of registered voters in the Republican Party, who are white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and the Democratic Party. And you can just see how quickly, these are 10-year breaks, 97, 7, and 17. Poor Kate, you're outside. You can't even see these. And they're...
No, I can see it. I'm just like thinking these are crazy.
You can see how quickly the Democratic Party is becoming more racially diverse and how little change there has been in the Republican Party. But really what I want to get to is the education slides. The gender piece, you guys kind of know this. Men and women, you know, we still have a gender gap. Women are on the top right. That's the Dems. Women over from 92 to 16.
It's interesting that for all the talk of how the gender gap has grown, it looks pretty flat, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
But if you look at white men, you see a bit of a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Holy cow. 48 to 61.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's a huge shift.
Yep. And a lot of it, and when you overlay it, this is the education, and this is where you see the differences. And I know I keep changing the timeline in the bottom, so it's hard, but if you look at the white high school or less, this is why the polls got so screwed up in 2016, because people hadn't really understood and registered this change. Look at this. It starts at 08, where you see white high school or less, white registered voters who identify as rep or dem. It used to be they were even, and now look at how it opened up since the Obama election. Even as white college grads started evening up.
Wow.
So what happened in 16?
So the Democratic Party should basically be paying to send white people to college.
Yes. And they probably
Ben,
somewhat in
that's
favor
a great
of that.
platform. Let's go with that. No problems there.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, we won't talk about the last Democratic primary because I think that was the plan.
Wow. Look at the drop in non-college.
Oh, you're good at reading these. You should have been a pollster. Look at you, data girl. Yeah. So this is showing you there's so many numbers on here, but it's, if you go to the far right and Dems, what Kate is talking about, it's the share of Democrats who are non-college whites, and look at it from 97.
Yeah, it's come down
bonkers.
a lot.
Yeah.
That's my generation. That's my generation. Wow.
And so the problem, oh, there you go. It was animated. Oh, generations. I don't know if you care. The millennials look really different, and Gen Z is coming to look really different. And the millennials haven't changed that much. They're not growing out of their Democratic leanings. So that's sort of interesting.
So interesting.
These are fascinating.
Then I got into the religion thing.
You would have liked when Larry Lessig was on. He was all about like basically like people as they get older should stop voting.
Okay, yeah,
that was his solution. That was his solution to everything. I liked that opinion. I thought it was interesting.
That sounds relaxing for somebody like me who is getting older. The other thing is, you know, we haven't talked about this religion thing, but like I've gotten extremely interested in this since I've been at Pew, because we've been really tracking this major societal step back from institutionalized religion. You know, the US used to have that exceptionalism. Do you remember those charts that would show religiosity and sort of GDP? And we'd always be this outlier. And now the question is, are we just going to revert to trend and match everybody else? Because this isn't the chart. I mean, I have some somewhere else just to show, but people over time are, and by generation in particular, much less likely to claim some sort of affiliation with any kind of institutionalized religion. And if you break up the Democrats, this is 2014, but it's just going to be more now, into their religious backgrounds, it's unaffiliated is the largest group in the Democratic Party right now.
And of course, Dems.
Yeah, this was
interesting. And so this is Republicans.
And this is Republicans.
Wow. Well, that's you know, so it's like the atheists versus like the born again Christians. That seems right to me.
And so one thing
that's great data. I love that.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that's been really something our religion team has been focused on is, everybody's talking about what does this quarantine and the pandemic mean for our remote work lives and all that. But they've been wondering, what does it mean for this trend in institutionalized religion? Is it going to be like everybody's obviously not going to church? Is this going to be the break and then nobody goes back? And now we see like a giant shift away from sort of church, synagogue, whatever. Or is it going to drive people back? Because in times of stress and pressure, people need something to hang on to.
Right.
So we're set up to try and watch that.
I just want to say that maybe like Time like kind of like blew their scoop too early on Is God Dead?
When did they do that?
1966.
Yeah.
But I hope you have that up in your office somewhere, in your religious team's office.
I don't think they do. They're still all
All
in.
right.
Yeah. I mean, America's still crazy comparatively religious. I don't want to suggest otherwise. Compared to other developed countries.
Compared to Europe, probably.
Compared to other developed countries, yeah.
So what does that, I mean, unaffiliated Democrats is, what was it, 38%?
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare? How does the Democratic Party compare to Europe?
I don't know about that offhand. All I know is that like the thing, I mean, for all the years back, particularly when I was doing more political polling, you would always be looking for what would disqualify a candidate, and you would have all these somewhat revolting traits. But being an atheist was always like the killer. And I think when I talk to young people, I don't know, they can't imagine that sort of this was a disqualifier, because in their generation, it's less common.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry. Running out of energy, but.
Well, let's go through the pet peeves then.
All right.
We've got a bunch on Zoom and a bunch on YouTube. I think we should just tick through them. Ian,
do you want to take
YouTube
and I'll take the Q&A?
Sure.
Do we all get to vote on whether it is qualified?
I think we just discuss them and decide whether they get added to the list.
Okay.
Kate, well, let's go through the Q&A first, and then we can.
Zach Bliss says people who say it's just a poll.
That's pretty niche.
Yeah, that's pretty niche. What's wrong? Like, that seems
I don't even understand what's wrong
peeve-y.
with that. I think if we don't understand what's wrong with it, it has to get added to the list.
Yep, that's on Zach. You've made the list. Next.
You read from YouTube.
Oh, okay. Guy Austin proposes overly tight elastic in the top of socks.
Oh, yeah, that's irritating. No, that's just legitimately irritating. So that can't be a pet peeve.
I don't think that's a pet peeve. I think that's
that makes everyone uncomfortable.
Yeah, you're just right.
You're buying socks that are uncomfortable, dude.
I mean, I think you should feel better if you don't get pet peeve status, because that just means, yes, you have identified an irritating thing about the world. Whereas if you get pet peeve status, it means we think you're a bit, that's a really weird thing to be upset by.
Yeah.
But we are with you in solidarity.
But yes, good for you for being unique.
Pauline Brock says pet peeve is a misplaced apostrophe, especially for plurals. And I'm sorry, Pauline, I'm going to have to say that probably all punctuation and grammar things have like large echelons of people who agree with you on the internet.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. You get the punctuation wrong. You get the apostrophe wrong. That's just like a crime against humanity.
It's objectively annoying. So not a pet peeve. Right.
Yeah. Agree.
All right. Pet peeve, power cords for electronic devices all being black. Would prefer random colors to make up.
That's a market opportunity.
Untangling, identifying easier. This is from Van Houten 64. This is a super pet peeve, I think.
Yeah, it's a really, really good one, but I think this person is right. Why are they all black?
Why? That would make untangling so much easier.
It would. I just tonight had to move over here and it was like,
Oh,
All right,
what a
Van
good
Houten
question.
64, you have a new business opportunity.
Totally.
before you.
Shark Tank, baby.
It is totally a pet peeve, and the market can resolve it for you. You can get rich resolving it.
I personally would buy some if you send me a link to your Kickstarter.
Tony Cava, I cannot abide Iron Man, nor his sidekick, as played by Don Cheadle. Iron Man makes my teeth hurt, and Iron 1, 2, and 3 are literally 3 of the top 5 worst Marvel movies. I don't want to know what the other 2 are in the top 5. Yeah. I mean,
Making your teeth hurt is a good description of something that could be a pet peeve, but I don't know.
Not. I like Iron Man. They're not. They're not my favorite.
The success of Iron Man in the theaters, and it is not, your view is not widely shared. So I think if it makes your teeth hurt and other people enjoy it, then it's a pet peeve.
Yeah, pet peeve.
Okay.
All right.
Marking it as a win.
Julia Renard says pet peeve: electric plugs that block the other outlet slots. That strikes me as objectively annoying.
Yeah. I don't think people talk about it very much. So I think that
Brandon Music's pet peeve: phone makers taking the headphone jacks out. That actually seems like the phone makers actively endeavoring to annoy their users.
Yeah, that's objectively annoying times 1,000.
Yeah, completely agree. Ian,
so that wraps the
YouTube.
Well, the YouTube pet peeves. Do we have more in the Q&A?
Yes. Ian Kidger says the frequent misuse of underestimate and overestimate in reporting. Again, I think that is the same thing as like a misuse of a particular word, like saying irregardless when that doesn't actually exist in the English language or something like that.
Do people actually misuse overestimate and underestimate in reporting a lot?
I would overestimate that there is an underestimation of how much people misuse those words. I'm just trying to get Ian's goat.
I've never noticed it either.
Yeah.
This is kind of a problem with discussing pet peeves, is then you start noticing objectively annoying things.
Oh, God.
You have more friction in your life. Like next time you have a plug that's blocking, you're like, another one of these GD plugs.
Yeah, exactly. Is that it, Kate, or is there?
No, there's one more. Big Blue Blogger has people's. Wait, we didn't vote on Ian's. Is that underestimate and overestimate? Is that a pet peeve?
Well, if it exists, it is objectively annoying that reporters can't use those words right. If it doesn't exist,
if it rarely exists and he notices it every time, maybe that would make it a pet
then peeve. It gets into pet peeve land.
Yeah,
I think.
So we need more data.
I said maybe. Okay. So pet peeve. People serving themselves from a central dish without moving their plates toward the source. Even if nothing drops on the table, it makes me nuts, in all caps.
Yeah, that's pet peeve. Get over it. If they're not dropping.
Yeah, if they're not dropping, I agree. That's a
really good one.
That's a perfect one.
That's a really good one. That's a strong one.
Ding, ding, ding. That was.
I love it that it bothers him even when it's harmless. I
am
love that one.
Ian has already gotten back to us saying that he will find an example. And Tony Cava says, "Yay, in your face, other pet peeves." So I'm very happy that we have had this conversation.
It has been a super pleasure. Claudia and I have a long-standing rule that we do not exploit one another's pet peeves, so I'm not going to finish the show by saying,
thank you, don't you dare say it. I will bring an electric knife to your house.
But come back anytime. Maybe we should have whenever somebody asks us a polling question, we can rapture you into the
lifeline me.
Yeah, exactly. Bring you in. Come back and join us again. And tomorrow it is Saturday, so we don't have a guest. It is just us. Sunday, we're going to have it's mystery guest Sunday. I think I'm bringing a mystery guest, right? It's going to be Joss Whedon. It's going to be Joss. And until tomorrow, Kate.
We don't have fun anymore. So in lieu of fun, you're just lucky I didn't have the chance to poll you about your feelings on Nate Silver. I know.
We will see you all tomorrow. Thanks, Claudia.
Bye, Claudia.
Bye, guys.